Somebody asked a question about should they use EQ, compression, on the way in when they're recording vocals, for example. I'm going to use this to talk about vocals, bass, guitar, anything like that. In my opinion, you should always use anything you have at your disposal if it makes the sound better. Now, what is better? This is where you actually get good by experimenting, trying out different things, seeing what you like. There's no right answer to anything when it comes to how to record or how to produce. But what there is people who get better at knowing what decisions work or not based on doing and based on making mistakes. There's nothing wrong with making a mistake and then learning from it. And worst case scenario, you have to do it again. So I don't like the idea of play it safe. Play it safe. Never use compression on vocals. You could always add it later. I hate this idea. I think it's ridiculous. In my opinion, you should use the compression and learn how to not be too heavy-handed with it where it makes you say, man, I overcompressed this and now it doesn't work. You may have to make that mistake in order to realize how not to make it. But if you never use the tools you have at your disposal, if you got some hardware, use it. You'll never get good. You're just prolonging the inevitable, which is one day you'll either get good or you'll be too scared to make a decision and commit anything all the time. So my school of thought is why not get good right away, which means use it. And the more you use it, the better you'll get. And so be it. If you make a mistake, you make a mistake. But at least you'll use it. And then you'll learn what to do and what not to do. Otherwise, you just play it safe. You never actually get as good of a sound. Also, let me explain it like this. When you're performing, you would perform better, like specifically on vocals, for example, if you had something controlling the peaks a little bit. So a little bit of compression. And maybe if you had some EQ sweetening up what your mic is doing a little bit. Doesn't matter what's going to work in the final mix. Like that really is not that relevant in my opinion. You're just you're recording to something. You're not recording an acapella to nothing. So you have something there. So it's your job as the person if you're the guy producing this, recording it, engineering it, if it's all you, you're going to make the decision, okay, this vocal sounds good, but it could be a little brighter. So maybe you have an EQ, you'd add a little EQ on the hardware. Maybe you need a little compression, so you compress it a little bit. Now, when you're performing, okay, you will get a better performance because you won't need to be so concerned with mic technique like you would have to be if you had nothing on it at all. In other words, there's a mic technique basically means how close or how far away you are from the mic at any given time based on what you're doing. So in other words, when you get louder, people who know what they're doing when they're singing usually back up a little bit off the mic, which will allow them to get louder and still not clip everything in sight. People who have no experience recording, they just keep their mic right up on the mic the whole time and they belt and they get quiet and they belt, but they don't move. The ones who have experience, they move back and forth. And I actually heard a story about Mick Jagger, who was so used to singing live that when he recorded something, way back in the day, his mic technique was backwards, where when he wants people to hear him live and he wants to get loud, he gets closer to the mic. So he was backwards on it back then. I'm sure he's not that way anymore because the dude is a legend. And you figure this stuff out over enough time. That's the thing. The better you are, like in terms of your level and like how successful you become as well, you learn these things just by doing it. You do it enough times, you record enough songs, enough albums, you learn what works and what doesn't. So a big thing that you should practice is mic technique. When you're going to belt and get super loud, back up a little bit. Even with that, putting a little compression on everything will sound a little better on the way in because it'll control those peaks a little bit so you won't clip. And when you get quiet, you'll actually be able to hear it a little more because the overall volume of everything has come up a little bit. This is helpful. No matter what, it's helpful. My go-to vocal chain is a 1073 into a Pultec into a compressor. 1176 is my go-to. You could use anything. You could use a distressor. You could use an LA2A. You could use a DBX. Like, just use whatever you got. CL1B, that's a fortune, right? Any clones of anything will work. whatever you have at your disposal, feel free to use, and if you've just got something like for example, I know the RME interfaces have compressor, like just generic compression and everything that you could use on the way in sort of scenario. You could put anything on it, like 4-to-1, and if that sounds like it's not enough compression, go to 6-to-1, go to 8-to-1. If you want a little bit of not very noticeable compression, people use 4-to-1 on an 1176, very common. They use a very fast release, and they use an attack that is going to grab the transient a little, but err on the side of slower attack and speed it up enough where it's just kind of grabbing those peak transients a little bit. Slow attack, fast release is very common, 4-to-1 ratio. That's a good starting point, and you could turn it up from there. You could get more aggressive from there, meaning you can make the attack faster from there if you'd like, and you could increase the ratio if you'd like. But the point is, a little of that, and on an EQ, what does it need? When you're listening back, like this is why monitoring is so important, because every decision you make is based on how you're hearing. So if you've got monitors you can trust and you're sitting there going, okay, the vocal's good, but it's very dark, you can make it brighter. And here's a big tip. The best, easiest, quickest fix for anything, if something doesn't sound good on vocals, is switch the mic. That's the first thing. If you don't have a lot of different choices of mics, or even one or two, then if you don't have that and you have an EQ, then work the EQ. But first step, if it just sounds awful, change the mic. If the mic sounds pretty good, but it's just missing something, then you go to EQ. All right. It's sort of in that order, in my opinion. It's like if I'm listening, it's just wrong for the singer, I'll change the mic up. I have favorites, and I love the clone of like a U47. Any kind of clone of a U47 it's okay. I mean, like U87, they're all not created equal, and I haven't used all of them, but depending on what you're using, those are very standard mic choices. Dynamic mic like an SM7, also a very popular choice, but they're very different. So if somebody sounds particularly not good on a U47, which is a tube mic, maybe you'll throw an SM7 on and that dynamic will sound a little better. An RE20 is a dynamic mic Tom York used to use a lot. Maybe that'll sound a little better. So you have different options, and that's why you would have different options in the studio. And don't be afraid to use anything you got. If your only other choice is like an SM58, sometimes that's perfect. Like sometimes an SM58 is perfect. You don't need a very expensive, great mic. It depends on the singer. If the singer's voice is great, you could literally use anything and it will sound great. So, if you want other flavors out there, invest in some kind of ribbon mic. I got a ribbon that's like a clone of a Royer 121, because those are notoriously good for like drum rooms and things like that. So, I record drums a lot. So I'll put left and right, room mics that are these ribbons, but I'll throw those up on vocals if I want that natural sound. Same thing on acoustic. I'll use those on acoustic guitar for natural sound. But anything will work, and it's all personal taste. So there is no right or wrong, but don't be scared to try things. When it comes to like what I maybe wouldn't do, maybe I won't add a high pass filter, and put it way up to get rid of like up to like, just for example, I wouldn't put an EQ with a high pass filter on and roll off all the low end of a vocal, for example. That I probably wouldn't do on the way in, but I might take a little off if there's some rumble happening in the room and the singer's feet are bouncing around on the floor and touching the mic stand and different, like if they're doing stuff where I hear this rumble or something, maybe I'll take out some 50, 60, get rid of some low end. But generally, I'm hitting a little bit of EQ. Like every time I make a video for you guys, I got a 1073, it's a BAE 1073 with the EQ on it. And it's like I've got the controls working. It's not flat, it's not bypass, it's working. And I'm in this specific case, I think for these videos, I took the Pultec out a little while ago. I'm not using the Pultec at all. It's just 1073, the BAE version of it, with the EQ on it, into an 1176. And the clone of the 1176 that I have is interesting. It's the Mohawk Audio 1176, which has two different transformers in it. So it allows me to have a different sound depending on if I want the Carnhill or the Edcore. Or Edcore, I don't know how to pronounce it, but that one, the two different transformers have different sounds. It's either Edcore or Edcore, probably Edcore, I don't know. But anyway, let me know in the comments. I don't know how to pronounce that, but the point is the different sounds, drastically different sounds. So I like that because it's almost like multiple compressors in one. with what you can do with that one because of that different. Just flipping the transformer sounds totally different. So anyway, also, when you use any sort of EQ or something on the way in, it's not only EQing, it's thickening, and it's you like these particular, like what I'm using as the mic pre, which has the EQ built in. That BAE 1073, when I hit it with different things, it thickens up the sound a lot because I'm driving the gain on it and lowering the output accordingly so that I'm not clipping anything, but it's definitely adding a bit of saturation to the sound. So it has its own vibe. And why would you want to miss out on that when you're recording something like vocals? And it's the same thing for recording bass or recording anything where you want to have more oomph than is just a dry signal into the mic pre. I have never been a fan of doing that. If I had enough gear to do it, I'd put a different piece of gear on everything if I was recording like a drum set or a drum set and a bass player. Or like everything would get its own piece of gear. But what people wind up doing, especially those of us who don't have a piece of gear to put on every single thing, we just do what needs to be done, and the things like in order of importance. Vocals, extremely important. Snare, extremely important. Kick, extremely important, unless you're going to use samples and stuff, in which case the priorities change a little bit. Bass, extremely important sound. And a lot of times you don't want to recut bass. You don't want to recut, if you had a great bass performance with the drums, like you want to be able to keep that. So doing things like EQing and compressing a bass on the way in, very helpful to making things sound good, in my opinion, especially because today, a lot of times I'll just use a DI for bass and I love the way it sounds. I can get a great sound out of that by saturating the EQ in the preamp and driving it into some compression and it works. People love distressors for things like that also. So there's no one way, there's no right way, but don't play it safe. When I think about playing it safe, I think about you're just prolonging how long it will take you to learn and get good. And the goal is to learn and get good quickly so that you can be happy with the results. Because at the end of the day, it's not about how successful anything gets. Make yourself happy with what you've recorded, and you'll want to keep doing it, and then you'll keep getting better. So everybody keep at it. You got this. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. And keep in mind, everything you do is nobody's going to tell you it's good or bad except for you. And if they do, it doesn't matter. You listen to your own opinion on whether you like it or not, because that's the only thing that really matters. The person doing it has got to like it. And if that's you, then make sure you like what you're doing. And put more stock in your opinion and less in everybody else's. Everybody that always says, don't put stuff on stuff, you could do it later, that you don't want to mess it up on the way in, I find that to be ridiculous. All the guys that I admire that came up from the old school, they all make it sound as good as they can on the way in. And then there's less to do in the mix process. And not only that, you're building a record that sounds like something because you've driven it down a direction of sounding like something. Rather than making all the decisions later and prolonging it all until the mix process, that's actually not a smart move, if you ask me. So talk to you guys later. Keep in mind, you got this. Leave a subscribe. I appreciate it. Hit the like button. Help me out. Talk to you soon. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.